Chris Roberts, the head of Cloud Imperium Games and Star Citizen's father, released a letter from the chairman blog post yesterday, hyping up 2023 content for the game and providing impressive stats on player-based growth. But the post was also capped off with a quick mention of yet another delayed release date for one of the game's longest teased updates. Let's get into the meat of it. Now, for the first part of the blog post, Chris spent some time talking about the new persistent entity streaming tech, which is Star Citizen's latest 3.18 upgrade, which is still being tested in the PTU. I did make a dedicated video on this new PTU build, but if you haven't seen it yet, in a nutshell, persistent entity streaming allows for all objects, spaceships, and dead bodies to persist in the Star Citizen universe more or less indefinitely, creating all kinds of new gameplay opportunities, and well, piles of trash. Chris also reiterated a cool statement saying, "I'm not aware of any other large-scale MMO that has tried to deliver this level of persistence." And I would back that up and say, not only have I never seen any other game attempt this at this scale, but nothing has even come remotely close to it. Chris then gets into some really impressive stats regarding the game's growth, and I have to say it is crazy impressive and super encouraging for fans. There was over 1 million unique logins to the game servers in 2022 with over 46 million hours played. There were 800,000 new accounts created this year. Their daily active user count has grown 50% from the previous year, averaging 240,000 monthly active users with highs of 400,000 players. The game also blew past its previously highest earning year, bringing in over $100 million, most of which, according to the blog, is coming from new players, which I think is really interesting, and it gives perspective in that the game isn't just pulling in tons of cash from veteran fanboys trying to keep the project alive, but that most of the money coming in is from people just getting into the game for the first time. Also, the conversion rate for people trying the game for free and then deciding to buy it is at 70%, which is crazy impressive. This is a huge stat and really speaks to the fact that Star Citizen has been packing on a lot of fun content. I am honestly surprised by this metric because the learning curve in Star Citizen is pretty rough, but it probably means that most players see from the start that there's actually a real universe worth exploring and that they managed to push through the buggy or unintuitive learning experience. Now, of course, along with the stats, especially about the cash flow, Chris was quick to mention that all of this money coming in goes right back into the game. They moved into 2 new studios in 2022 and have been hiring like crazy. CIG ended the year with 861 employees, which is pretty nuts and probably very much needed to develop 2 games and the crazy tech that they run on. This whole section overall is super encouraging to me. There was, after all, long periods of this game's development where people had to realistically consider that CIG could easily run out of money before the game was finished. But given the new metrics, especially how strong it's been in the previous years, it seems less and less likely. Now, Chris goes on to mention the Bar Citizen Dev Fan meetups and that 2023 will be having its CitizenCon as an in-person event once again now that COVID restrictions are easing up. There's a bit more info about their new studios and that they're going to be doing studio tours and stuff like that. Then he also reiterated on what the latest 3.18 patch is bringing into the game. And then finally, we get to the road to Alpha 4.0. Now, the 4.0 update is supposed to bring us the holy grail Star Citizen tech that, once implemented, will open up the universe to multiple systems, improve performance, and increase the server population massively. Of course, to get that done, they have to first iron out the remaining bugs in patch 3.18 and get that to the live servers, which he states is planned to happen in January. I think that sounds pretty reasonable given the state of Wave 1 PTU, but then again, trying to anticipate major blockers is always a crapshoot. They then want to add some additional quality of life features to 3.18, such as the ability to pick your server shard and even queue for the shard that you want to play on. This is actually pretty important because the persistence tech allows you to do stuff like create hidden stockpiles of loot on some planet or somewhere in the verse, or even come back and find your old shipwreck from a previous life and reclaim some of your lost gear. The catch is that if you want to do these things and see those items again, you need to relog into the same shard you were on before, so getting the ability to do that actually means a lot. This of course won't be as important once server meshing is in the game and players will be able to play on the same shard most of the time, but it is a good short-term feature that'll allow for full full testing of Persistence tech. After they get this stuff in, well, the devs are basically on a tech march towards 4.0, with one of the first major tech steps being the separating of the replication layer from the game server. There's some interesting details about this in the post, but a cool takeaway is the allegedly improved stability around server crashes, allowing for potentially seamless transitions from a crashing server to a new one. It sounds pretty cool, and this will essentially come with the full upgrade to true server meshing, allowing the current universe to be divided up into multiple servers to reduce load and improve performance. Chris then says, at this point we should be able to handle tens of thousands of players all playing in the same persistent shard. Now, this is a pretty massive statement, especially considering that they're aiming to bring that potentially in 2023. That would be basically increasing the server size from 100 players to, well, tens of thousands of players. Assuming Chris isn't just making up numbers here, since tens of thousands is a pretty vague ballpark. Even 10,000 players would be a server size increase of 100-fold of what we currently have. Something tells me that they may have to start increasing the number of hangars and landing bays at the major landing zones around the system. While 10,000 players might work well when spread across, say, 20 different systems, well, we're only going to have 2 systems when this tech comes, so it might get a bit crowded. Now here's where the real gut punch of the blog post comes in. Tactically inserted toward the end, and I quote, "We are aiming to put static server meshing and Pyro into the hands of players in the 4th quarter of 2023. Now, for anyone who's been following the game and perhaps drooled over the previous letter from the chairman back in May of 2022, about 7 months back that is, Chris said this: "Our current goal is to introduce server meshing in 4.0 as an early technical preview to Evocati testers in the PTU at the end of quarter 4 this year. That would mean Pyro and server meshing, well, basically now, at least for early testers." This was the estimate given by Chris about 7 months back, and now it's being pushed out potentially another 12 months. Now, in Chris's defense, he did inject a lot of "provided that the persistent tech testing goes well and the deadlines are met" type of statements in his previous letter from the chairman, so he did technically cover his butt. That said, it's still a massive underestimation on how long it was going to take them to implement this new tech, especially when the original estimate was basically 7 more months. All that said, if you're a fan of Star Citizen, this delay is definitely on the smaller side of things and doesn't even compare to the comically overshot release dates for the games, so I guess shame on me for getting my hopes up in this case, I suppose. Also, I should mention that the new quarter 4 2023 release date for 4.0 comes again with the same caveat that this is extremely complicated engineering work, which makes it incredibly difficult to predict development time. So it's entirely possible, and some might even say likely, that they will miss this release window as well. And of all of the updates and tech in Star Citizen, the 4.0 update is by far the most impactful and exciting. It's not just bringing a new Star system, but an entirely new backend server system, potentially a massive player count increase, and countless other benefits. Seeing it get delayed, then delayed, delayed again, and then delayed again is hard to weather for any fan. But I am, of course, sticking around to weather it. The silver lining for 2023 is that other extremely cool features will still be launching before 4.0 and server meshing. Chris mentions the item resource system, which I think he's referring to the resource management system, basically a very in-depth system for how substations and systems on ships and outposts will function, requiring maintenance, repair, and even intentional disabling or tampering to benefit in combat situations. It's super cool stuff and a huge upgrade to multi-crew gameplay. Bounty hunting will get full tracking systems and the ability to restrain and transport bounties, which actually sounds awesome. They're adding persistent hangars with freight elevators, allowing you to call up stored inventory or place things into storage. Personally, I think persistent hangars is a massively underhyped feature, as these hangars are intended to become basically your new hab units with customization options and potentially potentially the ability to have a ton of your own ships parked and ready to go at a moment's notice. There's still a lot of unknowns, but it sounds cool and like a potentially big quality of life upgrade as well. Chris then states that toward the end of the year, which I'm going to assume means pre-4.0, that we're going to see some of the features that have been developed in Squadron 42 come over to the persistent universe, such as the improved player traversal that we saw at CitizenCon, the improved interaction system, FPS scanning, the new star map, MFDs using the new building block UI, and much deeper combat AI. The brand new Gen 12 render engine is also expected to see many performance improvements and the addition of Vulkan API. And obviously all of this is huge and will massively improve the game in so many ways. The star map in particular is like the #1 most requested feature upgrade, so if we get that in 2023, that'll be pretty great for pretty much everyone. He also mentions that there's more features coming which aren't mentioned in the blog post, and we'll probably just have to wait for the February roadmap to get a better idea on the timeline for every single thing coming in 2023. Now, the community reaction is of course focused on the delay for Pyro in 4.0. Many are predicting Pyro in 2024, which honestly seems like a pretty safe bet at this point. I think what's interesting with Star Citizen, which is becoming more apparent in the recent years, and especially with 3.18 Wave 1, is that the added features and systems are bringing a ton of new gameplay opportunities that carry a lot of weight with them. So despite some of the biggest tech in the second Star system getting delayed yet again, there are still a lot of really meaningful upgrades that are going to flesh out gameplay loops. It seems like even if 2023 doesn't bring Pyro and server meshing, which of course I hope it does, that at least the other upgrades may really evolve the player experience in significant ways. Seeing that roadmap in February will be exciting, as it's going to give us a lot more details about specifically what's planned. Aside from the star map, my next biggest feature request is the new flight modes. Chris didn't mention it in the blog post, and I know it's a huge amount of work to port over from Squadron 42, as they basically need to add it to like over 100 ships individually, each with custom flight tuning, but I do really want this game to finalize its flight and combat design so that the player base can test it, refine it, and make it fantastic. Anyway, there's a ton of information here. Those are my kind of main takeaways from the blog post, but I'd be curious to hear what your takeaways are and what you want to see most in 2023 for Star Citizen, aside from the obvious 4.0 update. Let me know in the comments, and if you haven't seen my 3.18 coverage yet, check out this video here. It's honestly pretty cool stuff, and I think I did a decent job of summarizing the whole thing. As always guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap, signing off.